On a chilly autumn evening in the quiet town of Millbrook, the ordinary hum of daily life was shattered by a violent crime that would send shockwaves through the community. 15-year-old Marcus Hayes was arrested after the fatal stabbing of Leonard Grant, a well-known local shop owner, during a robbery that spiraled tragically out of control. The news spread rapidly, leaving residents stunned and grappling with disbelief. In a town where neighbors greeted one another by name and children played freely in the streets, the idea that a boy so young could be involved in such a grave act seemed almost impossible. The police arrived swiftly at Grant's Corner Market, the small convenience store that had served the neighborhood for over 2 decades. Inside, Leonard lay motionless behind the counter, his life extinguished in a moment of chaos and desperation. Witnesses described a frenzied scene, a masked figure rushing in, a sudden struggle, and then silence broken only by the wail of sirens as officers secured the area. Marcus was taken into custody nearby, his hands trembling, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. Initial reports painted a confusing picture. Was this a case of a reckless teenager caught in a moment of poor judgment, or something more sinister? The town's residents hoped for a mistake, a case of mistaken identity or a misinterpreted altercation. But as investigators pieced together the evidence, it became clear that Marcus was not only present, but the central figure in the tragic event. Surveillance footage showed the teenager entering the store just minutes before the attack, and forensic analysis linked him to the weapon found at the scene. The arrest ignited fierce debate among Millbrook citizens. Many struggled to reconcile the image of Marcus, the high school sophomore known for his quiet demeanor and love of basketball, with the violent act he was accused of committing. Parents questioned the safety of their children, while community leaders called for calm and reflection. The local news outlets fueled the conversation, framing the incident as a disturbing example of youth crime spiraling out of control and raising urgent questions about accountability and the justice system's treatment of minors. Marcus's case became a focal point in discussions about the causes and consequences of juvenile delinquency. Was this a tragic mistake born out of a moment's desperation, or a calculated act of violence? The town's response was torn between compassion for a troubled youth and a demand for justice for Leonard Grant, whose life had been brutally cut short. As the investigation deepened, the community braced itself for the difficult path ahead, one that would force them to confront uncomfortable truths about youth, violence, and responsibility. In an era marked by increasing social and economic pressures. In the days following the arrest, the mood in Millbrook remained tense. Schools held assemblies to address the incident. Counselors were brought in to support students, and parents grappled with difficult conversations about right and wrong. Marcus's family was thrust into the spotlight, their private grief and confusion laid bare for public scrutiny. Friends and neighbors expressed a bewildering mix of sympathy and fear, unsure how to process the fact that someone so close to them could be capable of such a crime. The case of Marcus Hayes would come to symbolize a larger societal struggle, a clash between hope for rehabilitation and the demand for punishment, between understanding the complexities of adolescence and upholding the rule of law. As the town waited for the legal proceedings to begin, one thing was certain: the quiet streets of Millbrook would never be the same again. The evening that would change everything began like many others for Marcus Hayes, a boy caught between the pressures of adolescence and the harsh realities of his fractured world. At 15, Marcus was navigating a life marked by instability and longing for escape. Yet, unaware of how quickly his choices would spiral into tragedy. Marcus lived with his mother, Denise, in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Millbrook. Their home was a far cry from the comfortable neighborhoods nearby. Walls thin enough to hear the arguments of neighbors, and the persistent hum of city noise leaking through cracked windows. Denise worked long hours as a cashier at a local supermarket, often leaving early and returning late, barely able to make ends meet. Marcus's father had left years earlier, a ghost in the family's history, leaving a void filled with unspoken grievances and quiet disappointment. That particular Friday started like any other, with Marcus waking to the sound of his mother's hurried footsteps as she prepared for her shift. Breakfast was sparse, just toast and weak coffee, before Denise urged him to get ready for school. But school had become a place of growing unease for Marcus. He struggled to fit in, caught between cliques, and often targeted by bullies who saw him as an easy mark. Teachers noticed his distracted gaze and slipping grades, but were powerless to reach through the walls he built around himself. By afternoon, the weight of the day bore down on him. His best friend, Josh, a few years older and already dabbling in risky behavior, approached Marcus after school with a plan. Josh's world was one of stolen goods, quick money, and a careless disregard for consequences. A stark contrast to the structure Marcus craved but lacked. Josh's influence was magnetic, offering a sense of belonging and power that Marcus desperately sought. The two met at the neighborhood park, where Josh laid out the idea. A robbery at Grant's Corner Market, a familiar spot that held promise for fast cash. Marcus hesitated, the voice of caution whispering in his mind, but the lure of easy money and acceptance drowned out his doubts. His home life offered little reprieve, and the prospect of quick relief from his struggles was tempting. As evening approached, Marcus's internal conflict intensified. He felt the pull of loyalty to his friend and the crushing weight of his own fears. Returning home to an empty apartment, where the silence was deafening and his mother's absence a constant, only deepened his sense of isolation. The prospect of the robbery became less about greed and more about survival, an act born from desperation rather than malice. With the plan in motion, Marcus and Josh spent the late afternoon scoping out Grant's Corner Market. They observed the store's layout, the comings and goings of customers, and the routines of Leonard Grant, the shop owner. Leonard was a fixture in the community, a man known for his kindness and quiet generosity. To Marcus, however, he was simply an obstacle between him and the money he needed. As twilight descended over Millbrook, the streets grew quieter, shadows lengthening along cracked sidewalks and dimly lit storefronts. Marcus's heart pounded as he prepared himself, the weight of what lay ahead pressing heavily on his chest. He was no longer just a boy. In his mind, he was stepping into a role he neither wanted nor fully understood, a role shaped by forces beyond his control. That evening, as Marcus and Josh approached the market, the tension was palpable. Words were few, replaced by a shared understanding of the stakes. The plan was simple, but fraught with risk. Enter quickly, grab the cash, and get out before anyone could react. But beneath the surface, fear and uncertainty simmered, threatening to boil over. Inside the store, Leonard greeted them with his usual cautious smile, unaware of the danger that lurked moments away. The familiar chime of the doorbell was drowned out by the sudden rush of movement as Marcus, heart racing, reached for the cash register. What was meant to be a quick grab spiraled into chaos when Leonard resisted, a struggle igniting that neither boy had anticipated. The fear that Marcus had tried to suppress exploded into panic. The knife Josh had brought, a last-minute addition to the plan, was drawn in a desperate attempt to control the situation. In the frantic moments that followed, Marcus's world fractured, the consequences of a single decision unfolding with terrifying speed. Outside, the quiet neighborhood bore silent witness as the events inside Grant's Corner Market unfolded. Passers-by heard the commotion, but were unsure of its nature until the police arrived, sirens piercing the night and shattering the fragile peace. Marcus, caught in the maelstrom of his own making, fled only to be apprehended moments later, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. In the aftermath, the community grappled with the wrenching reality of what had transpired. Marcus was no longer just a troubled teenager. He was at the center of a tragedy that would haunt Millbrook for years to come. The evening that began with the promise of escape ended in a nightmare that no one could have foreseen, marking the start of a long and painful journey for a boy pushed too far by the circumstances of his life. In the days leading up to the robbery, Marcus Hayes found himself caught in a precarious web of desperation and determination, his actions shaped by a combination of youthful impulse and the mounting pressures of his environment. What began as an uneasy plan between friends soon morphed into something darker. As Marcus crossed the line from mere contemplation to active preparation, a transition that would seal the fate of all involved. After agreeing to participate in the robbery with Josh, Marcus's mindset shifted dramatically. The initial thrill of rebellion and the promise of quick money gave way to a gnawing anxiety. But the pull of necessity was stronger than his doubts. He knew the risks, but convinced himself that the consequences were manageable. A dangerous illusion that would unravel with tragic consequences. Marcus began to take calculated steps to ready himself for the act. He borrowed a small folding knife from a cousin, something he assured himself was just in case, a tool to intimidate rather than harm. He spent hours walking past Grant's Corner Market, observing the store's layout, noting the placement of the cash register, and memorizing the times when the shop was least crowded. His eyes lingered on the front door's lock, the aisles, and the narrow path to the back exit. A mental map forming in his mind, each detail fueling a growing sense of inevitability. At home, the tension was palpable. Denise noticed Marcus's distant behavior, but attributed it to teenage moodiness. Conversations were sparse, and when she asked about school or friends, Marcus offered vague answers, retreating further into silence. The lack of communication deepened the chasm between mother and son, leaving Marcus isolated in his turmoil, a young boy grappling with forces he neither fully understood nor felt equipped to confront. As the day approached, Marcus's anxiety became harder to mask. He slept fitfully, awoke with a racing heart, and found himself unable to eat. His friends noticed his withdrawal, but only Josh was privy to the full extent of what was unfolding. Josh's bravado contrasted sharply with Marcus's apprehension, but neither spoke openly about the gravity of their plan. The unspoken tension between them was a fragile thread that threatened to snap at any moment. On the afternoon before the robbery, Marcus and Josh met again at the park, their usual haunt. Josh handed Marcus a small backpack containing gloves, a face mask, and a flashlight, tools to conceal their identities and aid in the theft. Marcus accepted the items with trembling hands, a heavy weight settling on his shoulders. It was no longer just a plan. It was a mission, one with irreversible consequences. The hours leading up to their departure were marked by a strange calm. Marcus tried to steady his nerves, rehearsing what he would say if confronted and picturing the sequence of events in his mind. He was painfully aware that this was no longer a game or an act of youthful defiance, but a real and dangerous crossing of a line from which there was no return. When they finally approached Grant's Corner Market that evening, Marcus's nerves peaked. His heart hammered in his chest as he rehearsed the steps, each breath shallow and rapid. The familiar streets seemed foreign, shadows stretching and twisting as if warning him back. Yet, the necessity he felt, fueled by fear, peer pressure, and the crushing weight of his circumstances, propelled him forward. Inside the market, Marcus's carefully laid plan quickly unraveled. Leonard Grant's calm demeanor gave way to alarm as the situation escalated beyond anyone's control. Marcus, overwhelmed by panic and fear, found himself reacting in ways he never anticipated. The knife, initially intended as a means of intimidation, became a weapon of desperation. The struggle was swift and chaotic. Leonard's resistance, born of survival instinct, clashed tragically with Marcus's frantic attempts to assert control. As the moments slipped by, Marcus's mind raced, torn between the impulse to flee and the horror of what had just occurred. The reality of his actions crashed down upon him. The cold steel in his hand, the sudden silence that followed the struggle, and the irrevocable damage wrought in those fleeting seconds. His carefully constructed world crumbled, replaced by a stark and terrifying new reality. Outside, the consequences of Marcus's decisions rippled outward. The quiet community of Millbrook was abruptly confronted with the harsh intrusion of violence and loss. Neighbors who had once exchanged casual greetings found themselves whispering about the boy who had crossed an unimaginable threshold. The image of Marcus Hayes, once an ordinary teenager, was now forever altered, etched into the collective memory as a symbol of fear, loss, and the fragile boundary between innocence and culpability. For Marcus, the journey from planning to action was more than a physical crossing. It was a psychological and moral descent. The choices he made in those critical hours were shaped by forces beyond his control: poverty, neglect, and the yearning for acceptance. Yet, the weight of those choices would bear down on him relentlessly, defining the trajectory of his life and the lives of those around him. As the police closed in, evidence mounted: the knife, the surveillance footage, the witness accounts, all painting a clear picture of premeditation and participation. Marcus's initial denials gave way to a reluctant admission, the burden of truth settling heavily upon him. The boy who had once sought escape found himself trapped, ensnared by the very circumstances he had hoped to overcome. In the aftermath, the community grappled with questions that resisted easy answers. How could a boy so young plan such a crime? What drove him to such desperation? And, perhaps most painfully, how could a life be irrevocably changed in the course of a single, fateful night? Marcus's deliberate actions, his scouting, his acquisition of the weapon, his resolve to carry out the plan, became central to the unfolding narrative, illustrating the complex interplay between choice and circumstance, youth and responsibility. This chapter in Marcus's story marked a pivotal moment, the point of no return where intention became reality and consequences began to unfold with relentless clarity. The gravity of his decisions would echo far beyond the walls of Grant's Corner Market, resonating through the courtroom, the community, and the lives irrevocably touched by one boy's fateful night. The crime scene at Grant's Corner Market was a stark contrast to the store's usual atmosphere, a place that, until recently, had been a hub of warmth and familiarity in the Millbrook neighborhood. Now, it was a chilling tableau of violence and panic, marked by shattered glass, scattered merchandise, and the grim presence of Leonard Grant's lifeless body behind the counter. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, mingling with the faint aroma of spilled coffee and stale cigarettes, a haunting reminder of the ordinary life that had been violently interrupted. First responders arrived within minutes, their hurried footsteps echoing through the narrow aisles as they assessed the situation. Paramedics worked frantically to revive Leonard, but the injuries were too severe. Despite their efforts, Leonard was pronounced dead at the scene, his final moments a silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded. The officers quickly secured the store, cordoning off the area as forensic teams began their meticulous examination. Marcus Hayes, meanwhile, was caught just blocks away, his face pale and eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. His flight from the scene was brief, but it spoke volumes about his state of mind, panicked, overwhelmed, and unable to fully comprehend the gravity of what had just transpired. When officers apprehended him, Marcus offered little resistance, his voice barely above a whisper as he denied any intent beyond the robbery itself. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Forensic experts combed through the store, gathering evidence that would soon paint a detailed picture of the night's tragic events. Blood spatter analysis revealed the violent struggle that had taken place near the counter, while fingerprints on the knife and the cash register linked Marcus and Josh directly to the crime. Surveillance footage from a nearby camera captured the two boys entering the store moments before the attack, their nervous glances and hurried movements betraying their anxiety. Despite Marcus's initial attempts to minimize his involvement, the mounting evidence made it clear that his presence at the scene was not incidental. Witnesses from the neighborhood recounted seeing the boys loitering near the market earlier in the day, and one bystander described hearing raised voices during the robbery, followed by a sudden, chilling silence. The narrative that emerged was one of a plan gone horribly wrong, a desperate act fueled by fear and poor judgment that escalated into irreversible violence. As the police pieced together the timeline, it became apparent that Marcus's actions were deliberate, not impulsive. The scouting of the store, the acquisition of the knife, and the calculated entry all pointed to premeditation. Yet, the chaotic nature of the crime scene suggested a loss of control, a moment when fear and panic overtook any coherent plan. This contradiction would become a key point of contention in the legal proceedings to come, as prosecutors and defense attorneys grappled with the complexities of intent and impulse. Back in the community, the aftermath of the crime rippled outward, shaking the foundations of Millbrook. Leonard Grant's death was not just a loss to his family, but a blow to the neighborhood's sense of safety and trust. The market, once a place of daily routine, became a grim symbol of tragedy. Its boarded-up windows and taped-off entrance, a stark reminder of the night that changed everything. Marcus's family was thrust into the spotlight, their private grief overshadowed by public scrutiny. Denise Hayes struggled to reconcile the image of her son, the boy she had raised, the child she had worried over, with the evidence mounting against him. Friends and neighbors offered a mix of support and suspicion, their voices a reflection of the community's conflicted emotions. Sorrow for Leonard, fear for their own safety, and bewilderment at how a child from their midst could commit such an act. The police department faced its own challenges as it balanced the pursuit of justice with sensitivity to the community's fears. Officers increased patrols in the area, engaging with residents to restore a sense of security while continuing their investigation. The local media descended, their cameras and microphones capturing every development, amplifying the tension and ensuring that the case remained at the forefront of public consciousness. Throughout it all, Marcus remained a figure caught between worlds, a frightened teenager facing the full weight of the law and a community seeking answers. His initial denials gave way to reluctant cooperation as investigators presented the evidence, but the damage was done. The scene at Grant's Corner Market stood as a silent witness to the night's horror, a physical manifestation of the choices and consequences that had brought Marcus to this point. Forensic analysis continued to uncover new details. Fibers from Marcus's clothing found on the counter, traces of Leonard's blood on the knife, and digital footprints from Marcus's phone that indicated his movements before and after the crime. Each piece of evidence further diminished any hope of a simple explanation or excuse, weaving a narrative of responsibility that would be impossible to ignore. As the days passed, the community grappled with the reality that the crime was not just an isolated incident, but a reflection of deeper social issues: poverty, neglect, and the vulnerabilities of youth left to navigate a complex world with limited guidance. The investigation into the crime scene became more than a search for facts. It evolved into a broader conversation about prevention, intervention, and the fragile line between childhood mistakes and adult consequences. The scene at Grant's Corner Market remained sealed off for weeks, a somber monument to the night when a young life was lost and another irrevocably changed. Law enforcement, legal teams, and forensic specialists worked tirelessly to assemble the case against Marcus Hayes, their efforts underscoring the seriousness with which the community and the justice system approached the tragedy. In the quiet moments after the chaos, Leonard Grant's family mourned in solitude, their grief compounded by the public spectacle that followed. Friends and neighbors rallied around them, offering support and sharing memories of a man whose kindness had touched many. Meanwhile, Marcus faced the daunting reality of his actions, his flight from the scene replaced by the inescapable truth that his life and those around him would never be the same. The crime scene at Grant's Corner Market was more than a location. It was the crucible in which a community's fears, hopes, and judgments converged. It was a place where the line between victim and perpetrator blurred, and where the consequences of one night's choices would echo far beyond the shattered glass and spilled blood. As investigators closed the chapter on the physical evidence, the story of Marcus Hayes and the fatal robbery was only just beginning to unfold. The arrest of Marcus Hayes sent shockwaves through the Millbrook community, rippling far beyond the confines of a single family or the closed doors of the Grant household. As news of the fatal stabbing spread, neighbors, friends, and even strangers grappled with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. The quiet rhythms of daily life were disrupted as the weight of the tragedy settled heavily over the town, forcing its residents to confront uncomfortable truths about youth, violence, and the fragility of safety. Within the Hayes household, the aftermath was a maelstrom of emotions. Denise Hayes, Marcus's mother, found herself caught between grief and denial, struggling to reconcile the image of her son, her quiet, often withdrawn boy, with the accusations now leveled against him. In the days following the arrest, Denise oscillated between frantic phone calls to attorneys and moments of stunned silence, her world unraveling as she faced the possibility that Marcus was capable of such violence. Friends and extended family rallied around Denise, offering what comfort they could, but the strain was palpable. Some whispered doubts, others expressed unwavering support, yet all were united in their shock. Marcus's younger sister, Lily, barely 8 years old, remained confused and frightened, unable to comprehend why her brother was suddenly absent from their home and why visitors came and went with somber faces. Outside the family, the community's reaction was equally complex. Millbrook's residents, once proud of their close-knit neighborhood, now found themselves questioning the safety of their streets and the influences shaping their youth. Parents organized meetings at local schools, seeking answers and ways to protect their children from a fate similar to Marcus's. The local media descended, their coverage intensifying the spotlight on the case and fueling public debate. Neighbors who had known Marcus since childhood expressed a range of emotions, from disbelief that someone they saw daily could commit such an act, to anger and fear for their own families. Some recalled moments of concern, times when Marcus seemed troubled or distant. But no one had anticipated the trajectory that led to that fatal night. The sense of betrayal mingled with sorrow, as the community mourned both Leonard Grant and the loss of innocence embodied by Marcus's fall. At Grant's Corner Market, the impact was deeply personal. Leonard's family grappled with a grief that was raw and unrelenting, their sorrow compounded by the public attention and the knowledge that the perpetrator was a child not much older than their own grandchildren. Friends and customers gathered to share memories of Leonard's kindness, his generosity, and the quiet strength he had brought to the neighborhood. Fundraisers and vigils were organized, attempts to honor a man whose life had been cruelly cut short. Local authorities found themselves navigating a delicate balance between enforcing the law and addressing a community's pain. Police officers increased patrols, engaging with residents to restore a sense of security, while simultaneously managing the heightened tensions and fears. Community leaders called for calm and reflection, urging residents to consider the broader social issues at play: poverty, family instability, and the challenges facing young people in Millbrook. The legal system prepared to take center stage, but before the courtroom drama could unfold, the emotional fallout was already shaping the town's fabric. Schools introduced counseling programs, recognizing the need to support students grappling with trauma and confusion. Social workers reached out to families, aiming to identify and intervene in situations similar to Marcus's, hoping to prevent future tragedies. Within Marcus's circle of friends, the arrest created fractures. Some distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the crime, while others wrestled with guilt and disbelief. Josh, the older friend who had encouraged the robbery, became a focus of investigation and community ire. The boundaries between victim and accomplice blurred, as the ripple effects of that night extended into every corner of Millbrook. The media coverage, while informative, often sensationalized the case, painting Marcus alternately as a cold-blooded criminal or a misguided youth in need of help. Opinion pieces and talk shows debated the appropriate response to juvenile offenders, the role of family and community in preventing crime, and the limits of forgiveness and justice. The town's residents found themselves caught in a whirlwind of conflicting narratives, each seeking to make sense of a tragedy that defied easy answers. Throughout this turmoil, Denise Hayes remained steadfast in her love for her son, despite the mounting evidence against him. She spoke publicly about the challenges of raising Marcus alone, the struggles they faced, and her hopes for his rehabilitation. Her voice, both anguished and resolute, became a reminder of the human dimension often lost amid legal battles and media frenzy. As the community continued to wrestle with the aftermath, a fragile sense of solidarity emerged. Vigils for Leonard brought neighbors together, while support groups for families affected by youth crime sought to create spaces for healing and understanding. Local churches and organizations stepped in, offering resources and programs aimed at addressing the root causes of delinquency and violence. Yet, beneath these efforts lay a persistent undercurrent of fear and uncertainty. The image of Marcus Hayes, a boy on the cusp of adulthood, capable of both innocence and brutality, haunted many. The question of how a child from their midst could become a perpetrator of such violence lingered, prompting ongoing reflection about the forces shaping youth behavior in Millbrook and beyond. In the weeks following the crime, the town's fabric remained frayed but not irrevocably torn. The Hayes family navigated a path marked by sorrow and resilience, while Leonard Grant's loved ones sought solace amid the pain. The community, shaken but determined, faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust and safety, aware that the shadows cast by one night's tragedy would linger for years to come. Marcus's arrest had become more than a legal event. It was a catalyst for dialogue, change, and confrontation with difficult realities. Millbrook's story was no longer just about a crime, but about the complex interplay of circumstances, choices, and consequences that define the lives of its youngest members. As the town braced for the trial and the questions it would raise, the echoes of that night continued to reverberate, challenging everyone to look beyond blame and seek deeper understanding. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the intimate turmoil that had gripped Millbrook since that fateful night. Rows of polished benches, the solemn gaze of the judge, and the intense focus of the jury created an atmosphere heavy with anticipation and gravity. Marcus Hayes sat at the defendant's table, his youthful face marked by a mixture of fear, confusion, and a dawning awareness of the trial's significance. The proceedings had begun, and with them, a public reckoning of the choices and consequences that had led to Leonard Grant's death. From the outset, the prosecution presented a compelling and unyielding case. The district attorney's opening statement was clear. Marcus was not a victim of circumstance, but a deliberate actor whose cold-blooded actions resulted in a man's death. The narrative was carefully constructed, surveillance footage showing Marcus entering the store, forensic evidence linking him to the weapon, and witness testimonies describing the robbery and the fatal confrontation. The prosecution painted Marcus as a young man fully aware of his actions, driven by greed and disregard for human life. Witnesses took the stand one after another. Leonard Grant's family testified with heavy hearts, their voices trembling as they recounted the man they knew. A devoted husband, a beloved father, and a pillar of the community. Their testimony was a poignant reminder of the human cost behind the legal jargon. Police officers described the investigation, detailing the collection of evidence and Marcus's apprehension. Forensic experts explained the significance of blood spatter patterns and fingerprint analysis, reinforcing the prosecution's assertion of premeditation. The defense, however, sought to shift the narrative, focusing on Marcus's youth and troubled background. His attorney painted a picture of a boy overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. Economic hardship, familial instability, and peer pressure. They emphasized Marcus's lack of prior criminal history and his expressions of remorse, arguing that his actions, while tragic, did not reflect a hardened criminal intent, but rather a moment of reckless desperation. The defense urged the jury to consider the developmental immaturity of adolescence and the potential for rehabilitation. Throughout the trial, the courtroom drama intensified as conflicting portrayals of Marcus emerged. Prosecutors depicted him as calculating and unrepentant, citing his careful planning and the weapon brought to the scene as evidence of intent. The defense countered with psychological reports and character witnesses who described Marcus as a sensitive and vulnerable teenager, prone to anxiety and easily influenced by peers. The tension between these perspectives underscored the broader societal debate about juvenile culpability and the boundaries of justice. Testimonies from Marcus's teachers and counselors revealed a boy struggling academically and emotionally, but also one who showed potential and desire to improve. They spoke of his quietness, occasional outbursts of frustration, and the absence of a strong support system. These insights aimed to humanize Marcus, inviting the jury to see beyond the crime to the complexity of his character and circumstances. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on all involved became increasingly evident. Leonard's family sat stoically, their grief raw and palpable, while Denise Hayes alternated between hope and despair in the courtroom gallery. Marcus himself appeared withdrawn, often avoiding eye contact and occasionally wiping away tears. The legal battle was not just about facts and evidence. It was a profound confrontation with loss, guilt, and the quest for justice. The prosecution introduced text messages Marcus had sent in the weeks before the robbery, some expressing frustration and anger, others revealing his conflicted feelings. These messages became a focal point, interpreted by the prosecution as evidence of premeditation and by the defense as signs of a troubled youth grappling with his emotions. The jury was left to weigh these fragments of a young mind under immense pressure. Witnesses who had seen Marcus and Josh in the days leading up to the crime described discussions about the robbery, lending credence to the prosecution's argument that the act was planned rather than impulsive. However, the defense highlighted Marcus's lack of adult guidance and the influence of Josh, suggesting that Marcus was more a follower than a leader in the crime. The courtroom was also a stage for the societal debate that the case had ignited beyond its walls. Media outlets covered the trial extensively, framing it as a test case for how the justice system treats juvenile offenders accused of serious crimes. Experts in adolescent psychology and criminal justice were cited in news reports, fueling discussions about brain development, impulse control, and the capacity for change. Throughout the trial, the judge maintained strict order, ensuring that the proceedings remained focused and respectful. Legal arguments were made over the admissibility of evidence, the interpretation of Marcus's intent, and the appropriate application of juvenile law. The defense argued for a trial within the juvenile system, emphasizing rehabilitation, while the prosecution pushed for adult charges, citing the severity of the crime. As the days turned into weeks, the trial unfolded with a relentless intensity. Each side presented its case with passion and skill, appealing not only to the jury's sense of justice, but also to their emotions and values. The courtroom became a microcosm of the larger societal struggle to balance accountability with compassion, punishment with hope. Witness after witness, piece by piece, the story of that night was reconstructed within the sterile walls of the courtroom. The jury listened intently, grappling with the weight of their responsibility. They were tasked with deciding not only Marcus's legal fate, but also, in many ways, the moral boundaries of youth and justice in their community. For Marcus Hayes, the trial was a crucible, an ordeal that stripped away the anonymity of youth and exposed him to the full glare of public judgment. The courtroom drama was a reflection of the complexities that defined his story. A boy shaped by hardship and poor choices, caught in a moment where desperation turned deadly. As the trial pressed forward, the question remained: would the jury see Marcus as a calculating criminal or a troubled child in need of mercy? As the courtroom drama unfolded, expert testimonies took center stage, illuminating the complex interplay between youth, brain development, and accountability. Psychologists, neuroscientists, and juvenile justice specialists stepped forward to provide the jury with a deeper understanding of the adolescent mind. A crucial context for assessing Marcus Hayes' actions on that fateful night. Their words challenged the traditional notions of culpability and punishment, inviting the court to grapple with the scientific realities of growing up under pressure. Dr. Evelyn Carter, a renowned child psychologist, was the first to testify. She explained that the adolescent brain is fundamentally different from that of an adult, particularly in areas responsible for impulse control, risk assessment, and decision-making. These regions, the prefrontal cortex and limbic system, are still in development well into a person's mid-20s, rendering teenagers more prone to impulsive behavior and less capable of fully grasping the long-term consequences of their actions. Dr. Carter described how peer influence, emotional volatility, and underdeveloped judgment converged to create a perfect storm in teenagers facing stress and adversity. She emphasized that Marcus's age and background made him especially vulnerable, navigating a world of conflicting emotions and external pressures with a brain not yet fully equipped to manage them. Her testimony underscored that while Marcus bore responsibility, his capacity for rational decision-making was impaired, warranting a nuanced approach to justice. Following Dr. Carter, Dr. Samuel Nguyen, a neuroscientist specializing in adolescent brain imaging, presented findings from recent studies. Using brain scans, he illustrated the stark differences in neural activity between adolescents and adults, particularly in regions linked to impulse control and moral reasoning. He explained that teenagers often act on emotion rather than logic, a biological reality that complicates traditional legal interpretations of intent and premeditation. Dr. Nguyen's testimony highlighted that Marcus's behavior, while serious and consequential, was influenced by these developmental factors. The brain's immaturity, combined with environmental stressors such as poverty and family instability, created a scenario where Marcus's ability to foresee and regulate his actions was compromised. This scientific perspective offered the defense a powerful argument for leniency and rehabilitation rather than harsh punishment. Juvenile justice expert Karen Fields then took the stand, drawing from years of experience working with young offenders. She painted a picture of the systemic challenges faced by adolescents like Marcus. Limited access to supportive resources, exposure to negative influences, and the absence of stable mentorship. Fields argued that the justice system must recognize these realities and tailor its responses accordingly, balancing the need for accountability with opportunities for reform and growth. Fields highlighted successful rehabilitation programs that focus on education, mental health support, and community reintegration, emphasizing that harsh sentencing often exacerbates recidivism rather than preventing it. She urged the court to consider Marcus's potential for change, noting that his youth offered a critical window for intervention and transformation, a chance to redirect a troubled path before it became permanent. The prosecution responded by calling their own experts, who acknowledged the scientific findings but cautioned against allowing developmental theories to excuse serious crimes. Dr. Richard Hayes, a forensic psychiatrist, testified that while the adolescent brain is indeed still developing, many teenagers possess sufficient understanding of right and wrong to be held fully responsible for violent acts. He argued that Marcus's planning and actions demonstrated a level of awareness inconsistent with a complete lack of culpability. Dr. Hayes emphasized that the court must consider the victim's rights and the community's need for justice and safety. He warned that overly lenient treatment of juvenile offenders could undermine deterrence and public trust in the legal system. His testimony framed Marcus's crime as not merely a youthful mistake, but a grave breach of societal norms requiring appropriate sanction. The battle of expert opinions underscored the inherent tension in juvenile crime cases. How to balance scientific insight into adolescent development with the imperative to uphold justice and protect the community. The jury was left to navigate this complex terrain, weighing the evidence not only of facts, but of human development and morality. Throughout the testimonies, Marcus sat quietly, absorbing the words that painted his actions as both a product of biology and environment, yet also a source of undeniable harm. His defense attorney later argued in court that these expert perspectives should guide sentencing toward rehabilitation, emphasizing Marcus's potential to learn, grow, and eventually contribute positively to society. The prosecution, meanwhile, stressed that scientific understanding should not overshadow the severity of the crime or diminish Marcus's responsibility. They argued that while youth and development are mitigating factors, they cannot erase the consequences of taking a life. The courtroom became a battleground of ideas, reflecting a broader societal debate playing out across the nation. Outside the courtroom, the expert testimonies fueled public discourse on juvenile justice reform. Advocates for change highlighted the need to incorporate developmental science into legal frameworks, while opponents cautioned against compromising public safety. The Marcus Hayes case became emblematic of these debates, a real-life example of the challenges in addressing youth crime fairly and effectively. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the expert testimonies had left an indelible mark on the proceedings. They introduced complexity and nuance into what might otherwise have been a straightforward legal judgment, forcing the jury and the community to confront uncomfortable questions about responsibility, mercy, and the capacity for change. The voices of the experts served as a reminder that Marcus Hayes was not simply a defendant, but a young person caught in a confluence of biological, psychological, and social forces. Their insights underscored the difficulties in adjudicating juvenile crime and the necessity of a justice system capable of balancing punishment with compassion and understanding. In the end, the expert testimonies did not provide easy answers, but instead illuminated the profound challenges inherent in cases like Marcus's, where childhood and criminality collide, demanding thoughtful and careful consideration from all involved. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as both sides prepared to deliver their closing arguments. A final, impassioned effort to sway the jury, whose decision would determine the fate of Marcus Hayes. The weight of the moment was palpable. The accumulated evidence, testimonies, and expert insights converging into two starkly different narratives about a boy who had crossed a line no one could undo. The prosecution's closing statement was delivered with measured intensity, underscoring the gravity of the crime and the irrevocable loss suffered by Leonard Grant's family. The district attorney painted Marcus not as a misguided child, but as a young man who had consciously chosen to commit a violent robbery that ended in murder. This was not an accident, the attorney declared, voice steady and resolute. Marcus Hayes planned this act. He brought a weapon. He entered that store knowing what he intended. And because of his actions, a life was lost. A man who was a son, a husband, a friend. Justice demands accountability. We owe it to Leonard, to his family, and to our community to hold Marcus fully responsible. The prosecutor recounted the surveillance footage, the forensic evidence, and the witness testimonies, emphasizing the premeditation and disregard for human life. The expert testimonies about adolescent brain development, while acknowledged, were framed as factors that do not absolve one of responsibility, especially when a deadly weapon is involved. Youth is no shield for murder, the prosecutor stated firmly. Justice must be served, both for the victim and to send a clear message that such violence will not be tolerated. When the defense attorney rose, the courtroom shifted. The lawyer's tone was softer, but no less compelling. She urged the jury to see Marcus not as a villain, but as a child caught in a storm of circumstances beyond his control. Marcus is 15 years old, she began, voice tinged with emotion. He is not a monster. He is a boy whose brain is still developing, whose judgment is impaired by his age and environment. Yes, he made terrible choices, and he must face consequences. But he also deserves mercy. The defense revisited the expert testimonies, reminding the jury of the scientific realities of adolescent development. How impulse control and foresight are limited at Marcus's age. She spoke of his difficult home life, the peer pressure he faced, and his expressions of remorse since the incident. This is a chance to help Marcus find a better path, to rehabilitate rather than simply punish. To do otherwise is to condemn a child to a lifetime lost behind bars when he could still change, still grow. The lawyer's appeal was both practical and heartfelt, asking the jury to weigh not only the facts, but the broader implications of their verdict. "We are not just deciding a case," she said. "We are deciding what kind of justice we want, one that recognizes the complexity of youth, or one that condemns without hope." As the defense concluded, the judge offered final instructions to the jury, emphasizing the importance of impartiality and the legal standards they must apply. The jurors were reminded to consider all evidence, to deliberate carefully, and to reach a verdict based solely on what had been presented in court. The jury retired to deliberate, the weight of their responsibility evident in the solemn faces as they left the courtroom. Outside, the community waited anxiously, aware that their collective future hung in the balance. The trial had exposed deep divisions between those calling for strict accountability and those advocating for compassion and reform. Hours turned into days as the jury wrestled with the complexity of the case. Discussions were reportedly intense, with jurors debating the significance of Marcus's age, the evidence of planning, and the expert testimonies on adolescent brain development. The question of whether Marcus's actions constituted first-degree murder or a lesser charge was at the heart of their deliberations. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom was packed. Silence fell as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. The words, "guilty of first-degree murder," struck like thunder, echoing through the room and sending a ripple of shock and relief in equal measure. The decision affirmed the prosecution's argument that Marcus's actions were premeditated and deserving of the most serious charge. Marcus's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and resignation. Tears welled up in his eyes as he whispered, "I'm sorry." But the weight of the verdict seemed to extinguish any hope for mercy. Leonard Grant's family, though devastated, expressed a sense of closure, their grief mingled with a measure of justice served. The verdict ignited fierce debate beyond the courtroom walls. Advocates for juvenile justice reform lamented what they saw as a harsh sentence for a child, while others praised the decision as necessary to uphold the rule of law. The case became a flashpoint in national conversations about how society balances accountability with the developmental realities of youth. For the community of Millbrook, the verdict was both an end and a beginning. It closed a painful chapter while opening new questions about prevention, rehabilitation, and the challenges of addressing youth crime. The trial had laid bare the complexities of justice in cases where childhood and criminality collide, leaving a lasting impact on all who had borne witness. As Marcus was led away, the stark reality of his fate settled over the courtroom. The jury's decision was final, but the conversation sparked by the trial would continue, shaping attitudes and policies for years to come. The story of one boy's tragic choices had become a mirror reflecting society's deepest struggles with justice, mercy, and the hope for redemption. The courtroom was heavy with tension as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence that would determine the course of Marcus Hayes' life. The months of testimony, evidence, and emotional testimony had culminated in a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder. And now, the young boy who once roamed the streets of Millbrook was to face the consequences of his actions. The judge's voice was steady, but grave, as the sentencing began, underscoring the seriousness of the crime and the irreversible impact on the victim's family and the community. "I have considered the evidence, the arguments of counsel, and the circumstances surrounding this case," the judge began, eyes fixed on Marcus. "The taking of a life is the most serious offense our justice system addresses. While the defendant's youth and background have been noted, the premeditated nature of the crime cannot be ignored." The courtroom was silent, every ear straining to hear the words that would seal Marcus's fate. The judge acknowledged the expert testimonies about adolescent brain development and the defense's plea for leniency, stating that these factors, while relevant, do not absolve Marcus of full responsibility for the murder of Leonard Grant. The law must balance compassion with accountability. The judge continued. In this case, the need to deliver justice for the victim and to uphold the rule of law outweighs the mitigating factors. Turning to Marcus, the judge's tone softened slightly but remained resolute. Marcus Hayes, you are sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years. The words echoed through the courtroom, a chilling finality that seemed to freeze time. Marcus's eyes welled with tears, and a choked whisper escaped his lips. I'm sorry now. But the judge responded firmly, it is too late for apologies. The consequences of your actions are irreversible. The sentencing was met with a mixture of emotions. Leonard Grant's family, seated in the front row, showed a complex blend of relief and sorrow. The weight of their loss remained, but the verdict and sentence offered a measure of closure. Community members who had followed the trial expressed varied reactions. Some saw the sentence as just and necessary, while others mourned the harshness imposed on a child whose life was still unfolding. Denise Hayes, Marcus's mother, was overcome with anguish. She wept openly, devastated by the separation from her son and the magnitude of the punishment. Friends and advocates for juvenile justice reform voiced their concerns, arguing that a life sentence, even with parole, was excessively harsh for a teenager. They pointed to the potential for rehabilitation and the scientific understanding of adolescent brain development as reasons to seek alternative sentencing. Meanwhile, supporters of the sentence emphasized the gravity of the crime and the need to protect society from violent offenders, regardless of age. They argued that justice must be firm to deter similar acts and to honor the victim's memory. The debate that had simmered throughout the trial now intensified in the aftermath of the sentencing, highlighting ongoing tensions in how society addresses juvenile crime. In the days following the sentencing, Marcus was transferred to a juvenile detention facility, beginning a new and challenging chapter. The reality of incarceration weighed heavily on him as he navigated the stark environment. Surrounded by other youths facing their own struggles, he grappled with feelings of regret, isolation, and the daunting prospect of spending decades behind bars. Psychologists and counselors assigned to the facility noted Marcus's remorse and willingness to engage in educational and therapeutic programs. Yet, the long sentence cast a shadow over any hope for early release or a fresh start. Marcus's case became emblematic of the broader discussion about the appropriateness of life sentences for juveniles, prompting calls for legislative review and reform. At the same time, Leonard Grant's family sought to move forward, channeling their grief into advocacy. They established a foundation in Leonard's memory, dedicated to promoting conflict resolution and supporting families affected by youth violence. Their efforts aimed to prevent future tragedies by addressing the root causes that had contributed to Marcus's path. The community of Millbrook remained divided, but united in its desire for healing and safety. Schools enhanced programs focused on youth development and violence prevention, while local organizations expanded outreach to at-risk families. The case of Marcus Hayes became a catalyst for change, inspiring conversations and actions that extended beyond the courtroom. For Marcus, the sentencing marked a profound turning point, a moment when youthful mistakes collided with the harsh realities of the justice system. As he began serving his sentence, he faced the challenge of reconciling his past choices with the possibility of growth and redemption within the confines of incarceration. The journey ahead was uncertain, marked by the weight of a life sentence and the fragile hope for eventual parole. The judge's decision underscored the complexities inherent in cases involving juvenile offenders, where the line between childhood and criminal responsibility blurs, and where the justice system must balance punishment with the potential for rehabilitation. Marcus's sentence was a stark reminder of the consequences that follow irrevocable decisions, resonating far beyond the courtroom walls. As the community grappled with the aftermath, discussions about juvenile justice reform gained momentum. Policymakers and advocates revisited laws governing sentencing for minors, examining the role of brain science and the ethics of life imprisonment for youth. Marcus's case became a touchstone in these debates, highlighting the need for a justice system that is both fair and compassionate. In the years to come, Marcus would face the challenges of incarceration, education, and self-reflection. His story, marked by tragedy and consequence, would continue to influence conversations about youth crime and the pursuit of justice. The sentencing was not merely the end of a trial, but the beginning of a complex narrative about accountability, mercy, and the possibility of change. The sentencing of Marcus Hayes marked not only a pivotal moment in his life, but also a profound turning point for the Millbrook community, the victim's family, and the broader conversation about juvenile justice in America. The reverberations of that fateful night and its legal aftermath extended far beyond the courtroom, sparking debates, reforms, and deep reflection on the complexities of youth crime and punishment. In the immediate years following the verdict, Marcus's life was confined within the walls of a juvenile detention facility, a place where the echoes of his actions mingled with the daily struggles of adolescence behind bars. Despite the bleakness of his circumstances, Marcus sought to find meaning amid the despair. He immersed himself in education programs, counseling sessions, and vocational training, determined to use his time productively, perhaps in hopes of one day earning parole. His remorse was genuine, a constant companion as he grappled with the irreversible impact of his decisions. Yet, the sentence, a life term with eligibility for parole only after 35 years, cast a long shadow. The weight of such a punishment for a teenager ignited national debates on the ethics and efficacy of severe sentences for juvenile offenders. Advocates for reform pointed to Marcus's case as emblematic of a system struggling to reconcile punitive justice with scientific understanding of adolescent development. They argued that while accountability was necessary, the possibility of rehabilitation and redemption must guide sentencing, especially for minors whose brains and characters were still in formation. Legislators in Idaho and beyond began to re-examine laws governing juvenile sentencing, inspired in part by the intense public scrutiny surrounding the Hayes case. Some states moved toward limiting life sentences without parole for juveniles, emphasizing alternative approaches focused on rehabilitation and reintegration. Marcus's story became a catalyst for policy discussions, highlighting the need for a justice system that balances the severity of crimes with the potential for growth and transformation. Meanwhile, the Grant family, still mourning the loss of Leonard, channeled their grief into constructive action. Heather and Charles Grant established the Leonard Grant Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting conflict resolution, supporting families affected by youth violence, and advocating for programs that address the root causes of juvenile delinquency. Their work sought to prevent future tragedies by fostering dialogue, education, and community support, turning personal loss into a source of hope and change. In Millbrook, the community slowly began to heal, though the scars remained visible. Schools implemented enhanced counseling services and violence prevention programs, aiming to identify at-risk youth and provide interventions before desperation led to tragedy. Local nonprofits expanded outreach efforts, partnering with families to address poverty, mental health, and social isolation, the factors that had shaped Marcus's path. The case also left an indelible mark on the justice professionals involved. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges grappled with the moral complexities revealed by the trial, recognizing that legal frameworks often struggled to accommodate the nuances of adolescent behavior. Training programs incorporated lessons from the Hayes case, encouraging a more informed and empathetic approach to juvenile cases. As Marcus served his sentence, he confronted the dual realities of punishment and possibility. Behind the prison walls, he reflected on the choices that led him there, the pain he caused, and the uncertain future ahead. He engaged in educational pursuits, earning his GED and participating in programs aimed at personal development. Marcus's journey embodied the tension between accountability and hope. A young man defined by a tragic moment, yet striving for a better self. The story of Marcus Hayes became a touchstone in broader societal conversations about youth, crime, and justice. It underscored the challenges of addressing juvenile offenders who commit serious crimes, balancing the demands of public safety with the recognition that youth is a time of growth and change. The case illuminated the limitations of a one-size-fits-all approach to justice, advocating for policies informed by science, compassion, and a commitment to rehabilitation. For Millbrook, the legacy of the Hayes case was both cautionary and transformative. It served as a somber reminder of the potential for violence within families and communities, even those that seemed peaceful and secure. At the same time, it sparked initiatives aimed at preventing similar tragedies, fostering dialogue, and supporting vulnerable youth before desperation could lead to irreversible actions. The trial, the verdict, and the sentence all contributed to an ongoing dialogue, a societal examination of how we view children who commit grave crimes and how the justice system should respond. Marcus Hayes's case prompted lawmakers, legal professionals, and communities to question assumptions, explore alternatives, and advocate for a system that acknowledges the complexities of youth and the possibility of redemption. In the quiet moments of reflection, those involved, whether family members, community leaders, or Marcus himself, recognized the profound and painful truths at the heart of the story. That a child's choices, shaped by circumstance and biology, could cause irrevocable harm. That justice demands accountability, yet must be tempered with mercy. And that the path toward healing is often long, fraught, and uncertain. As the years unfolded, Marcus continued to serve his sentence, carrying the weight of his past while striving toward an uncertain future. Leonard Grant's memory lived on through the foundation and the community's efforts to foster peace and understanding. And the town of Millbrook, forever changed, remained a testament to the enduring challenges and complexities of juvenile justice. A story that resonated far beyond its borders, urging a nation to rethink how it balances punishment, compassion, and hope.